And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and I am really excited about this video because this is something that has been in the works for at least a couple of years now, ever since there was rumors and rumblings of this starting. And I'm really excited to do this video because already there's a lot of detractors online because that's the way that internet tends to be nowadays, especially social media, usually more negative than positive. But I just want to kind of throw in and, my thoughts on it and give you the 411 because that's what this channel is about everything involving USA Rugby, especially something as big as this. But this is the World Rugby Nations Cup just announced by World Rugby. And I'll basically explain what that is and what that means for your USA Eagles. So first of all, World Rugby Nations Cup is actually the second tier of an international competition that will be happening every even year, technically every 2 years, starting next year, 2026. It will involve 12 nations, and the nations have been aligned here. And basically, these are 12 nations that have all just recently qualified for the upcoming 2027 World Rugby Cup. When the announcement video was made, the last team wasn't quite decided yet. It was between Samoa and Belgium. By the way, kudos to both teams. Belgium, good lord. Who would have thought that Belgium would be in the final match to qualify for a possible spot in the Rugby World Cup? They just fell short. They tied with Samoa, but Samoa ended up having the more points overall in the competition, so they ended up moving on to the Rugby World Cup. And so congratulations to Samoa. Again, Belgium, it was exciting to watch a country like Belgium, and that's what's great about the competitions nowadays for rugby. There is a possibility for younger nations like Belgium. Hey, Zimbabwe just qualified for a Rugby World Cup. Hong Kong is in a Rugby World Cup. So you're starting to see a lot of younger in regards to rugby nations getting their chance to be in the big spotlight. That's why, and we'll go over this when we talk about the Rugby World Cup draw, this is going to be the first Men's Rugby World Cup where the number of teams have expanded to 24 this time, and that allows a lot more nations to come in who otherwise would not have get the opportunity. But anyways, going back to the Rugby Nations Cup, this was rumored about for quite a few years where there was going to be an international competition involving all the big nation rugby nations in the world that will compete, very similar to the what we're talking about right now, the Rugby World Cup, but it's different. It's a different competition, and I'll get back to why there's been issues about it. But this one is the Tier 2. So these are the lesser nations. There is the actual World Rugby Nations Championship. That's the Tier 1. That will involve, I'm not going to go too much into detail of it. You can go to worldrugby.com for all the information on that competition. But that will actually involve the top tier nations, the six nations: England, France, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and Italy, and then your 4 rugby championship nations: South America, Australia, Argentina, New Zealand, and then what has long been rumored but will now be official, Fiji and Japan, who, as I mentioned in my prior videos, have always been kind of teetering on that Tier 1 to Tier 2. They're the upper Tier 2 nations. Now, considered Tier 1 nation. Japan has been a Tier 1 nation for a while. Fiji is not officially a Tier 1 nation, but now kind of almost basically considered now that they're part of the Rugby World Cup Championship. Now, the Tier 2 competition involves, as I mentioned before, the 12 teams that just qualified the Rugby World Cup. They're not considered Tier 1 nations, but they've made it because they are qualified for the Rugby World Cup. And coincidentally, they're kind of ranked right below the top 12. So you, in essence, have pretty much the top 24 teams in the world. So the pool has been divided between those 12 teams into 2 pools, Pool A and Pool B. Pool A, it just conveniently kind of makes it basically represents teams from Africa, Asia, and Europe. Georgia, Hong Kong, Spain, Portugal, Romania, and Zimbabwe. And then Pool B basically represents teams from the Americas, North America, Central America, and South America, and then from the Pacific area, which is basically the Pacific nations, USA, Canada, Samoa, Tonga, Uruguay, and Chile. So the way the competition works, this will start in 2026, so next year, during the July and November international windows. So that's during the summer and during the fall, where most countries will compete against each other outside of their local competition. So you're talking about Major League Rugby, you're talking about Top 14 in France, you're talking about League One in Japan, you're talking about the URC in Europe, as well as Premiership Rugby. Outside of those competitions, the international competitions take place during the summer in July, the fall in November. That's when these competitions will happen instead. So what you'll have is you'll have these two pools. Each team will play every team in the opposite pool. Half of them in July, the other half in November. At the end of the entire competition, whichever teams in the top pools, Pool A and Pool B, they will be considered the winner. At least for right now, according to World Rugby. And then in 2030, the third iteration of this competition, we will actually have, and this is the exciting part, regulation and deregulation. So that means from that championship group, the bottom teams probably will drop into the World Rugby Nations Cup, and then the top teams will move up into the championship tournament. So why I like this a lot, okay, is because of that regulation and deregulation. Also, too, first of all, it allows countries to compete on a very high international level, like the United States, that don't normally get to do that. And it's a consistent basis. You're doing this every 2 years, so you're at least having every other year some top-notch competition on a consistent basis. And that's always been what's a struggle for the United States and some other countries, is that they never ever get a chance to compete with other top caliber countries. They always have to somehow fight their way to get these matches. These matches have to happen now because this is a bi-yearly competition. So you also look at countries like Fiji and Japan, who normally don't get to compete with the top tier nations. And the top tier nations, I'm talking about the Six Nations and the Rugby Championship, they compete with each other every year, always, consistently. And it isn't a coincidence that those countries are the top tier 1 countries in the world, because the tier 1 countries face against the tier 1 countries all the time, and that's what makes them better. Competition makes everyone better. The reason why we really want Major League Rugby to survive in the United States is because not only does it give our local boys, our local American talent, chance to compete, but it brings in foreign players as well, top-notch foreign players. Your used to be Matt Goodtoe, your Adam Ashley Cooper back in the day when they're competing with the LA Guiltinis. You're bringing in guys like Nanu to San Diego. Some really top-notch talent that are able to compete in the United States with American players, and the American players are able to grow from that competition because metal, as they say, metal sharpens metal. If you're able to play top-notch talent, that will raise your caliber. That's why, even though some people criticize, like the United States playing against Scotland just recently and getting slaughtered, chance that you're able to compete with these higher nations just gets those players a chance to experience what it's like and show you how much you have to work to be up there. So the way that the Six Nations and the Rugby Championship, they don't allow other teams to play in those competitions. There is no deregulation or regulation. There's always been rumor about it, but it's never happened. So those teams will always stay locked into each other. This competition actually allows teams to make their way in. Fiji and Japan have a shot now to compete with Six Nation teams at least every 2 years for the first two competitions. So that really increases their caliber. And then with the regulation and deregulation, though we don't know exactly how that's going to work out, there's a possibility that these teams in 2030, which is only 4 years away, have a chance to jump into the top tier championship and then get a chance to play against consistently top talent at least for a year, you know? So it really does give countries a chance to really up their game, to play on a higher level and grow from that experience. Also, too, even though it hasn't been announced how this is going to happen, I'm pretty sure with that regulation, deregulation, moving from the tier 2 to the tier 1, there is an opportunity for tier 2 teams to drop out and then other ranked teams to come in. It's very similar to the women's competition, WXV, where they have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. In the tier 3, there's a possibility that the tier 3 team drops out and a unranked or a team that's not involved in the tournament but that's the highest ranked in the World Rugby rankings gets a chance to move into that tier 3. I feel that would be very similar to how they're going to do it here with the World Rugby Nations Cup, that possibly a team that's maybe the highest ranked that's not in this competition, like a Belgium, like a Namibia, gets the chance to slide in once we have some regulation, deregulation. So that gives those nations, again, an opportunity to play at a higher level than what they're used to. So this really gives the chance for a lot of countries to get their game to be higher, to compete at a higher level than they normally are. And they don't have to fight like the United States has been fighting to play against certain teams. It is ingrained, it is an automatic every other year. Now, the argument has been, well, as I mentioned before, this competition sounds a lot like the Rugby World Cup, which, by the way, the Rugby World Cup happens in odd years, every 4 years, and it's always an odd number year. This happens on even number years only, so it doesn't intersect with the World Rugby Cup. You'll never have a year where the World Rugby Cup, the World Rugby Nations Championship and Cup, and also the very popular British Irish Lions Tour will never happen in the same year. So at least each year, you get these competitions a chance to shine on its own. That being said, yes, it does sound very similar to the Rugby World Cup, but if there's ever any fear that it takes away from the uniqueness and the speciality of the Rugby World Cup, look no further than the before mentioned WXV that I just mentioned about. That women's competition has happened already. That plays every year, except for a year that there's a Rugby World Cup for the women. So just recently. Every year we've had a WXV. And yet, despite the fact that we've already had 2 WXV competitions, the recent World Rugby Women's Cup was the biggest Women's Rugby Cup ever happened. It's the most highly attended, most highly viewed, and the biggest money-making Women's Rugby World Cup ever. So if there's ever been any fear that another similar competition will take away of the interest or the speciality, it's not going to happen. And I don't feel this will interfere either. People are afraid that it will, but I guarantee you when we have the 2027 Rugby World Cup, people are still going to watch it. It won't affect anything. I just feel this, again, allows these nations, the Tier 2 nations, Fiji and Japan, a real chance to grow and compete at a higher level. At a level very, not similar, but, at least competitively with the Tier 1 nations. And if anything, it can get these fringe tier 2, tier 1 nations like a Japan, like a Fiji, like a Georgia, the chance to really up their game and quite possibly break into the tier 1 mold that, we've always been arguing that those nations are. So I'm super, super excited about it. Also, what's really cool about this is that these are all teams that have qualified for the Rugby World Cup. This gives USA a chance to really get a familiarity with possible opponents in the Rugby World Cup. Teams that I feel, especially like a Spain, a Portugal, and a Georgia, these are teams that are on similar level to the United States, and the more that we get to play them, the more that we will gain our game, we will get a little bit higher, we will get to know what it is like to compete at an international level on, again, a consistent basis. That's one of the biggest things that head coach Scott Lawrence has always been complaining about. The United States Eagles never get a chance to really compete at a basis that teams, tier 1 teams like France and England and Australia and New Zealand get to do. They compete at least 6-7 times, actually more than that, 7 to 8 times a year. United States maybe gets 6. So this really gets the chance to increase that load to allow the USA Eagles a little bit more cohesion of playing together as a team, and really gets our boys that international experience that they need. So, dates haven't been set yet. We don't know exactly when these games will happen. Just like I said, it will be July and November. We don't know when United States will play against them. Don't know exactly where we'll be home and away. I feel that it'll probably be a mix of each team gets 3 home games, 3 away games, so it's a little bit even. But yeah, and again, what's even better and what I love about this is that it just means more rugby. And more rugby, if you're a rugby fan, is always the better solution. So I'm really psyched up about this competition, and I can't wait. Again, I don't have exact details of dates and everything, but I will of course be the first one to tell you. We'll of course do preview videos of that, and we'll know a little bit more basis of the exact structure of this. It's kind of funny in the World Rugby Championship format. They've already laid out all the schedules and everything because they already knew all the teams ahead of that. Like I said, by the time they first announced this, we didn't know exactly who the last team was going to be. But in the World Rugby Championship tournament, they already knew everything, so they already have all the schedule laid out. In that one, there's actually at the end a finals week or championship weekend where the top teams of each pool face against each other, second, third, fourth, and so on and so forth. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem like that's happening here in the Nations Cup, which is a shame, but I'm hoping in the future that we will see that. And I think we might see that a little bit more once we start to do that promotion and regulation and deregulation, just to determine who gets to move up, who gets to move down. But again, it just brings a lot more excitement to this. And as I mentioned before, I'm super excited, and more rugby, the better. So that's pretty much it. So I hope you guys, again, this is a quick video. More information will be revealed in the next coming months. Obviously, though, like I said, super excited about this. It's going to be a lot more rugby and a lot more fun for us USA Rugby Eagles fans. So anyways, thank you very much for checking out my video. I appreciate it as always, and I'll see you on the pitch.